He was the kind of man who understood the power of words better than most people ever would. Harder than he ever dreamed he could fall. Truth was not a standard to live by, but a tool to manipulate, a flexible thing he could bend into whatever shape suited his needs. He had grown up in small, forgotten corners of the city, watching others work themselves to the bone, and still never escape poverty. He knew early on that hard work was not the way out, not for him. Cleverness was, and lies were the sharpest tools in his kit. His rise began with small things, barely noticeable, the kind of deceptions most would excuse. A fabricated credential here, an exaggerated story there. At first, he spun tales about his education, how he had studied under the best, how he had connections to people of influence. He dropped names he had only seen in newspapers, but he spoke them with such confidence that few dared doubt him. People wanted to believe in him because he made them feel that they were standing in the presence of someone destined for greatness. When he walked into a room, he did not just enter. He took command. His voice carried conviction, and his smile disarmed even the most cautious of skeptics. If he lacked knowledge, he disguised it behind jargon and half-truths, weaving words into a fabric so convincing that no one noticed the holes. Those who challenged him often found themselves silenced, not because he proved them wrong, but because he knew how to make them feel small, foolish, as though questioning him was a mistake in itself. It was not long before he found himself climbing ladders meant for men and women who had spent years building their reputations through toil and sacrifice. He leapt over them effortlessly, his lies acting as rungs that carried him higher and higher. Jobs appeared in his lap, positions of authority he had never earned but claimed as though they had been waiting for him all along. Companies entrusted him with their futures. Investors gave him their money. Ordinary people gave him their faith. And he thrived in the spotlight, living in a world of champagne parties, tailored suits, and whispered admiration. The city began to speak his name with reverence. They called him a visionary, a genius who had broken the mold. He stood on stages, addressing eager crowds with speeches filled with promises he had no means to keep. Cameras loved him, and so did the headlines. He had become the embodiment of success, proof that ambition could rewrite destiny. But the higher he went, the more fragile his empire became. Lies, after all, are bricks made of glass. One crack leads to another, and the structure cannot withstand its own weight. The first fissure appeared in the form of a journalist, someone who was not swayed by charm or showmanship. She began to peel back the layers of his carefully constructed image, uncovering inconsistencies in his story. A missing diploma, a reference that could not be verified, a timeline that did not add up. He dismissed her publicly, mocking her questions, ridiculing her persistence. But in private, he felt the pressure building. For every lie she exposed, another had to be created to cover it. His world became a web of frantic invention, each thread weaker than the last. The people who had once praised him began to whisper doubts. Those who had invested their trust started demanding proof. And then, the collapse came, not in a slow crumble, but in a sudden, violent crash. Documents were leaked, testimonies gathered, truths brought into the light. The empire of illusions he had built over years unraveled in a matter of days. The press that once celebrated him now turned on him with the ferocity of wolves. His partners abandoned him. His investors demanded their money back. The adoring crowds vanished, leaving only anger and betrayal in their place. He tried, in desperation, to hold on. He gave interviews, pleaded with the public, painted himself as a victim of envy and conspiracy. But the lies had finally run out, and the mask he wore for so long had fused too tightly to his face. The man beneath was unrecognizable, stripped of the charisma that once made him untouchable. What remained was nothing more than a cheat, a hollow figure who had mistaken deception for genius. When it was over, he was alone. The wealth was gone, the power dissolved, the admirers turned to enemies. His name, once spoken with admiration, became synonymous with disgrace. He wandered through the very city that once celebrated him, now avoided like a disease, his presence a reminder of betrayal and broken trust. He had lied his way to the top, but lies are fragile ladders. They had carried him higher than truth ever could, but when they shattered, they ensured his fall was harder, sharper, and final. And so he lived with the silence of his own downfall, a silence heavier than applause, heavier than cheers, heavier even than the lies that had built him. He had dreamed of being remembered as a legend. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, the classic cheat who rose on falsehoods, only to come crashing down into the ruins of his own deceit. He had always believed that people were eager to be deceived. That was his greatest weapon, not his words, not his practiced smile, but his understanding of human weakness. Most people, he thought, did not truly want the truth. They wanted stories, and he was a master storyteller. In his early days, when he was still clawing his way out of obscurity, he learned the art of shaping his lies to match the desires of his audience. To the wealthy, he spoke of even greater riches. To the desperate, he promised salvation. To the ambitious, he dangled opportunities that sounded too perfect to ignore. He could look a man in the eye and make him believe the impossible, not because the lie was flawless, but because he made the man want it to be true. He had lovers, too, and to each one he became whatever they needed most. To the lonely, he was devoted. To the broken, he was gentle. To the guarded, he was patient. Yet beneath the tender words and gestures, there was nothing genuine, only calculation. He absorbed their trust, their admiration, their money, and their connections, leaving behind hollow promises. Some suspected, of course, but by the time their doubts grew strong enough to confront him, he had already moved on to the next conquest. His closest circle, if he could ever be said to have one, was built on shifting sand. He surrounded himself with those dazzled by his aura, people too eager for proximity to success to question its foundation. They laughed at his jokes, echoed his ideas, and defended him against critics, but none of them truly knew him. How could they, when even he barely remembered which lies he had told to whom? He did not care for loyalty. He cared for utility. When someone ceased to be useful, they were discarded like worn shoes. But as his name climbed higher, as his face appeared in magazines and his speeches were broadcast to crowds, he began to believe in his own fiction. That was his fatal error. He forgot, somewhere along the way, that the man the world adored was not real. He began to see himself as untouchable, as someone whose brilliance justified his shortcuts. What had once been careful lies told for gain became reckless boasts, arrogance spilling over like cracks in a dam. The unraveling was not only professional, it was personal. Lovers who once clung to him grew disillusioned when they discovered the same phrases whispered to them in the dark had been spoken, word for word, to others. Friends realized that the promises of partnership, of shared ventures, were nothing but bait to keep them tethered until he had drained them of value. The journalist who pursued him found no shortage of betrayed voices willing to speak, ex-lovers with broken hearts, employees cheated out of wages, investors stripped of savings. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, revealing a man whose entire existence was a forgery. And when the truth finally hit the world like a storm, he felt the walls closing in. At first, he denied it all. He still had his voice, his weapon, and he wielded it with desperate ferocity. He told the public he was the target of jealous rivals. He insisted that the documents were forgeries, that the testimonies were lies, that the journalist was on a personal vendetta. Some still wanted to believe him, but doubt had grown roots, and this time, the lies could not cover them. The trial that followed was a spectacle. He arrived in court still dressed in tailored suits, trying to maintain the image of control, but the mask was cracking. Witness after witness stood against him. Papers and emails, undeniable proof, were laid bare before the world. For the first time, his words did not command the room. The judge saw through him. The jury saw through him. The public, once spellbound, now watched with venom in their eyes. When the verdict came, he felt something he had not felt in years: silence. The kind of silence that comes when the stage lights go dark, when the applause ceases, when there is nothing left to perform. He was sentenced, stripped of wealth, stripped of power, stripped of the illusions he had wrapped himself in. In prison, he was no longer the visionary, the genius, the rising star. He was just another man in a gray uniform, his words useless against the concrete walls and iron bars. For the first time in his life, no one believed him. The guards ignored him, the inmates saw through him, and the world outside had moved on. His name became a cautionary tale, repeated in classrooms and whispered in offices. Beware of the man who promises too much. And yet, in the stillness of his downfall, he could not stop replaying it all. The stages, the lights, the adoration. He wondered if it had been worth it, to soar so high only to be broken so completely. But deep down, he knew the answer. He had never truly risen. He had only climbed a ladder built from lies, and ladders like that never lead anywhere but down. He became a ghost in his own lifetime, remembered not for brilliance, but for betrayal. The classic cheat, who lied his way to the top and then came crashing down. He had learned to lie long before he ever knew what success looked like. As a boy, he discovered that a well-placed falsehood could buy him more than honesty ever could. When his pockets were empty, he would spin tales to the shopkeeper about a father who would surely pay tomorrow, and when caught stealing, he would cry with such convincing desperation that even the hardest faces softened. Every victory through deceit lit a spark in him. The world was not about truth, it was about performance. And he was a natural performer. At school, he rarely studied, yet he rose to the top of his class. Teachers praised his brilliance, not realizing that he had cheated on exams, copied assignments, and manipulated classmates into doing work for him. The other children both admired and resented him. Some tried to expose him, but their protests were drowned in his charm. He had an answer for everything, a smile for every accusation. It was his first real taste of power. As he grew older, the lies became bigger, more dangerous, and more rewarding. When he entered the world of business, he walked into meetings with nothing but a forged resume and unshakable confidence. He invented degrees from universities he had never set foot in, claimed experience in companies that had never employed him. But when questioned, he could speak so fluidly, so persuasively, that even the most skeptical minds surrendered. He was not selling facts, he was selling belief. There were moments, however, when cracks showed. An assistant once found 2 different versions of his biography, each with different details. She hesitated, confronted him gently, and he did what he always did. Looked her in the eye and told her she had misread, that she must have been tired, confused. Then he laughed softly, warmly, making her feel foolish for even asking. She apologized, embarrassed. Within weeks, he fired her, ensuring the doubt she carried went unheard. The women who fell for him suffered most. He promised them futures he had no intention of giving, marriages, homes, children. He spoke of grand plans, luxurious trips, endless devotion. Some gave him their savings, others their trust, and all of them their hearts. He moved from one to the next, leaving behind confusion, tears, and bitterness. One woman once asked him directly if he truly loved her. He kissed her forehead, whispered yes, and by the time she realized the truth, he was gone. For years, he lived as though the world existed to be deceived. He moved through circles of wealth and power like a shadow wrapped in light. People wanted to be near him, to share in the glow of his supposed brilliance. No one saw the rot beneath, or if they did, they silenced their doubts with the hope that his promises might still come true. He built a kingdom of illusions, and even he began to mistake it for reality. Then came the journalist. She was not dazzled by his charm, nor softened by his charisma. Where others saw confidence, she saw calculation. She followed his trail with relentless patience, tracing back every degree, every contract, every promise. She uncovered lovers with identical stories, companies that never existed, and charities he had pretended to support but never had. The portrait she painted of him was damning. When the story broke, it spread like wildfire. Investors who had trusted him found their money gone. Lovers discovered they had been part of a pattern, not a partnership. Friends realized they had been pawns. The city that once worshipped him now spat his name with disgust. He tried to fight back, holding press conferences, pleading with the public. But for the first time, his words did not work. The spell was broken. The fall was swift and merciless. Lawsuits piled up, accounts were frozen, and the once adoring press now circled like vultures. He lost his homes, his cars, his reputation. And when he stood in the courtroom, stripped of the armor of lies, he looked small. The same mouth that had built his empire could not save him anymore. He was sentenced, humiliated, and cast aside. In prison, there were no stages, no applause, no audience to fool. The lies that once gave him wings now weighed on him like chains. He replayed his rise at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there had been a moment he could have stopped, turned honest, chosen another path. But he knew himself too well. He had never wanted truth. He had only ever wanted the rush of deception. And so he sat, a broken figure in a gray cell, remembered only as a warning. The boy who learned to lie had become the man destroyed by his lies. The city moved on, the world forgot him, but his name remained in whispers and cautionary tales.